Welcome back, this is News Extra. Now, should Norwich have a green belt, an open area of countryside around the city where building is restricted? The campaign to protect rural England in Norfolk are calling for one, and now they could be supported by a new report that's come out this week. Well, let's discuss that and some of the arguments for and against having one in the city. I'm joined by Chris Dady, Chair of the CPRE in Norfolk. Good evening, Chris.
Evening.
Now, this new report, I've covered the basics of it, but are you very encouraged by it? What's in it?
Well, the report is about, or a green belt, is about trying to protect the size of the town by stopping it sprawling into the countryside. A green belt is not about preventing development, other than restricting it within the belt. And it's not about creating a sort of exclusive residential development zone of expensive houses. It is something that everyone can benefit from.
So you feel there's some misconceptions about what a green belt actually is in the first place before we even look at what's in this report?
I think so. I think if you are, for instance, a young person in Norwich looking for your first house, you can't afford to buy one, and then someone says, oh, we can put a green belt around it, they will naturally think, well, that's going to stop me buying a house, but that is not the case.
So the case for having one in Norwich, this report does actually mention Norwich. It's a national report, but it mentions
Indeed.
Norwich as an area that could do with one, frankly. Were you particularly encouraged by that?
Yeah, extremely so. Norwich is a fantastic city, still quite compact, a lot of heritage, and it is a tremendous city to live and work in. But if it sprawls further, I think we can all think of examples of cities that have sprawled, and they lose their identity. You lose the community spirit, commuting becomes very difficult, and indeed services are quite difficult for people to get to.
Because once this report has laid out its findings, can you go through some of the basics of those? Why was it so important for us to actually have this report come out?
Well, I think it's important. If we look at the various policies that our councils have, they actually have a lot of the principles of Greenbelt already in them. And that's not only Norwich, that's Yarmouth and Kings Lynn and Thetford and all the other towns in Norfolk. In planning terms, Norwich is the only place in Norfolk that is large enough to actually justify a Greenbelt. But looking at practice on the ground, with the government issuing massive housing targets, councils struggling to try to meet those housing targets in very short time frames, what we're tending to see is housing allocations sprawling further and further out on Norwich on farmland. But
the idea, I suppose, is building better within the city. Now, if you look at other comparable cities in the area, or towns, say if you look down to Ipswich, where there's quite a lot of land that can be redeveloped, you can look around Norwich city centre, and there isn't that much compared to a lot of other cities or large towns. Can that make it quite difficult to develop within the city when frankly, we're running out of space?
Well, it can make it more of a challenge, obviously. But brownfield is not just, or the previously used land that you can build on is not just sites you can see. It could be redevelopment of old buildings. There's quite an amount of vacant property that can be brought into that. So it's a sort of amalgam of things that you can use to try to, if you like, protect the urban area by continuing to keep the urban area alive with development. And I think that, although there's no official statistics, I think we'd be surprised at just how much land there is in Norwich that could be used.
Because how worried are you that if Norwich doesn't get a designated green belt, how worried are you that it could just continue to keep spreading and sprawling?
Well, I think I'm worried for a number of reasons. We know there's a definite link between people's health and well-being and access to the countryside. So that's one aspect. We know that some commuting journeys into Norwich now are pretty difficult, pretty time consuming, and money's going into roads rather than really bolstering up other forms of transport. We know that there's a housing crisis which clearly is in, and not across the whole housing spectrum, but for instance in affordable housing. Now if you sprawl developments out and then you allocate small parts of those developments for affordable housing, those people are actually quite remote from where they really want to be. So I think that's another major issue. And then of course I suppose common sense tells you that land on which we grow food now, if you build on it, you don't have that option.
Because some people watching this, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, might say, well, we need more homes. My family are crying out for a bigger home, or I'm trying to get on the property ladder. And they might see that greenbelt as a barrier for new development they feel that needs to be seen. What would you say to someone who thought that?
Well, I think it's important they don't see that. If we look at the situation now, we don't have a greenbelt. If you look at housing alongside Norwich, 2001 to 2026, there was some 60,000 housing allocations. Now we're more than halfway through that period and only a third have been built. So having these huge allocations is not getting the houses we need built. We think we should, a greenbelt will concentrate the mind, will start to get people to think, well, we need these affordable homes. We have some land in the city, let's start doing smaller developments to get these houses now, which is when people need them.
So when it comes to actually getting a greenbelt set up, I know there's a petition running from the CPRE at the moment. Will that make a difference? Could that actually tip that over?
I think it's very important to have people's support to that. There's then a planning process to go through where an application would be made. But obviously we don't just want people's support, we want support of our local authorities. And that's where people signing.
But is that harder to come by when they're under such pressure with housing targets?
Well, it is, but I think if individual councillors start to look at what their communities want, I think that there is quite a groundswell of opinion that would say, yes, let's actually start to think about a greenbelt, or at least the principles of a greenbelt, and we start, instead of sprawling, we start to use land close into the towns and city to do our development.
But the call has been for a greenbelt for some time. If you were a betting man, would you bet on Norwich getting a greenbelt in the near future?
Well, if you look at the all the various criteria within the planning legislation today, you would say Norwich should have one already.
So you think we tick all the boxes?
So I think we tick all the boxes.
But looking a bit further afield, other towns around Norfolk, they're not the right size to have greenbelts. But do you think that lessons could be learned across the whole of the county?
Yeah, I do. I think the principles of the greenbelt can be applied anywhere. You know, if you look at, we have some fantastic towns. For instance, Great Yarmouth is a just tremendous place, but that's suffering sprawl, even though there's quite a lot of land within Great Yarmouth that could be used for housing and jobs.
But then there's other towns around the county that are starting to sprawl in, and is that sort of the point you're trying to make, I suppose?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you very much indeed for your time. And as we said, that petition does continue too. Okay, that's all the time we have for this evening. As ever, you can always join the conversation on Twitter. We are @MustardTV. The usual hashtag is NewsExtra. But for now, my thanks to Chris for his time tonight, and to you for watching. Have a very good night.